Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Tales of a Red Arm. I'm your host, Justin, and today we're jumping into Chapter 32, The First Ship. We are going to continue off of Matt telling Tom that they're going to jump on the first ship that is taken off, like the first one. So they head down to South Harbor, which is a great Ogier-made basin. Basically this circular-looking dip in the ground because the rest of the island's a little bit higher up in the air. And it kind of just your typical, if you look at like a city, the standard side made cities, I guess, you have the cities that basically drift as they go down because you have your waterfront, which is kind of obviously where the water is, and then it kind of will go uphill into the upper city and whatnot, where the actual city is, but it kind of like slopes down into this little bowl where you'd have kind of a harbor or something of that. And you can see it on the map on the books or on Google or something. They have these like little circular or semicircle, I guess, kind of areas. And they basically are ports, individual ports, and there's a couple of them. I'm pretty sure there's two. There's one north and one south. And basically ships would pull into them. There'd be like a big dock that's kind of like a crescent moon, and you could pull your ships in, unload what you got to do, all that type of stuff. And there would be taverns and merchant places all over the place for where people trade, where people relax for their adventures and whatnot. And they would basically do just that, where they would, basically just hang out and maybe get in a couple scuffs, drink lots of alcohol, and then, proceed as they were. But those who wanted to trade would take all their goods on their carts or trade something into the merchants or from the merchants and then bring it into the city. They have to go kind of up a hill a little bit to gradually ascend into the city. So that's kind of what's going on. Is it's this they basically come out on top of this big hill that would go down, and they would basically descend into the basin, and it's gorgeous because it's Ogier craftsmanship. Now, Ogier are technically workers of wood, but because they basically taught themselves the art of stone masonry and stoneworking, they're also just coincidentally really good at that too. That's how they kind of survived trade-wise after the breaking of the world. But it's this huge, round, high-walled harbor and everything, and if I recall correctly, they enclose these harbors so no one can get in and like attack them with these big chains. And these chains, like if a ship tried to go into the chains would pull taut and basically damage the ship, potentially sinking it and whatnot. If you were trying to like keep anybody from getting in or getting out, you could technically take your own ships on the outside and sink them on purpose so that any ships trying to go in and out would potentially hit the shipwrecks, and in doing so damage their ships, potentially losing all of their crew and all of their materials on board. So there's a lot of cool ways they do it, but I'm not going to get too into the medieval concept of medieval/Renaissance period of harbor warfare, but that's something to keep an eye on at later points, or anything else, any type of city constructions and whatnot. But anyway, they're heading down there, and Tom's still muttering, and they go towards the wharf, and there's a gray-haired man on the wharf, basically dressed like a dockmaster, and he might have been a dockman because of the way he's built, but he glanced up in Matt's direction and stopped, surprised on his leathery face. He just basically tells him, like, hey, your bundles tell me what you're trying to do, lad, but you might as well forget it. Sister showed me a drawing of you. You're not going to board any ship in South Harbor, so just head up those stairs so I don't have to tell a man off to watch you. And Tom's like, what the? What under the light? And Matt's like, that's all changed. And there's a ship that's casting off its last mooring line. And he pulls out the Amerlin's paper out of his pouch, thrusts it in the dockman's face. He's like, as you can see, I'm on the business of the tower. The order of the Amerlin seat yourself, and I have to leave on that very vessel right there. The dockmaster reads the words, then reads them again. He's like, I never saw such a thing in my life. Why would the tower say you can't go and then give you that? Which is a great question, but you're not supposed to question the Amerlin. And he's like, well, you can ask the Amerlin if you want, but you'll have my hide and yours if I don't get on that ship. And Dockmaster's like, you'll never make it. But he's already, like, turning to cup his hands and yell, aboard the Grey Gull there! Stop! The light burn you! Stop! Sorry, I didn't mean to try to get that loud, but kind of dramatizing it a little bit. So he's like, I don't believe it. You'll never make it. Guys, stop moving! So he's trying to help him out while simultaneously not believing he's going to make it. But the guy that's on the tiller on the ship looks back at him and is like, what? And he speaks to a tall companion in a dark coat with puffy sleeves, probably, a captain or something. And he's like, give way together. And Matt's like, oh, well, I'm going to make it. And he's like, oh, I said the first ship, and I meant the first ship. Come on, Tom. So, without even waiting to see if the gleeman followed, he runs down the wharf, dodging around men, barrows, a bunch of cargo, and everything. The Grey Gull's stern and the wharf widen as the sweeps bit a little bit deeper, but he throws his quarterstaff like a spear onto it, and then he takes one more step and jumps as hard as he could. And he notices the dark water beneath his feet look pretty icy, and he's just like, maybe I made a mistake. But then he clears the ship's rail and is rolling across the deck, and he scrambles his feet and hears a grunt and a curse behind him. Tom Maryland, hoisting himself over the railing with another curse, climbed over the deck, and he's like, I lost my stick. I'm going to want another. And he's rubbing his right leg, looking at the water, and he's like, I had a bath today already, looking at the water. I don't need another one. But the shirtless steersman just stares wide-eyed from him to Matt and back again, clutching the tiller as if he could use it as to defend himself from these crazy people who just jumped onto his ship. And the tall man was about as very stunned, and his pale blue eyes bulged, and his mouth worked soundlessly, and his dark beard cut to a point, which you can kind of guess where he's from, considering that. If you recall all the previous encounters we've had with people, and or the descriptions given of people, he's a tyrant. And he seems to start quivering with rage, and his face is almost purple. He's like, by the stone! Yep, he's totally tyrant. What is the meaning of this? I got no room on this vessel for much as a ship's cat, and I would not take vagabonds to leap on my decks if I did. And he calls some of his crewmen over, and he's like, throw this rubbish over the side. And then two extremely large men, barefoot and stripped to the waist, stand up from coiling lines and start towards the stern. The Matt waves the Amerlin's paper towards the bearded man, the captain, with one hand, fished a gold crown out of his pouch for the other, taking care of, even in haste, as the fellow saw that there's plenty more where that came from. But he tosses the coin, the heavy coin, to the man, and he's like, well, for the inconvenience of our boarding, Captain, but more to come as, we get to where we're going and all that stuff, so, we're on business with the White Tower, personal command of the Amerlin seat. Imperative we sail immediately to Erangel and Andor. Very urgent. But the blessings on the White Tower are on all who aid us, and the Tower's wrath on any who impede us. I'm like, that's quick thinking right there. But he knows that the man has seen the flame of Tarvalon seal by the time, and a little bit more, Matt hoped. He folds the paper again and thrusts it back out of sight, eyeing the two big men as they're coming up either side of the captain. He's like, oh, burn me, they both have arms like parons. And he wished he had his quarterstaff in hand. He could see it lying on the landing further on the deck. And he tries to look like he's confident and whatever, and then the captain looks at Matt doubtfully, but then even more at Tom, who's in a gleeman cloak and not steady on his feet. But he motioned the other two guys to stop where they were. He's like, I wouldn't anger the Tower. Burn my soul for the time being the river trade took me from Tyr to this den of, well, I come too often to anger anyone. But I spoke the truth, by the stone I did. 6 cabins I have for passengers, and all full. You can sleep on the deck and eat with the crew for another gold crown each. And Tom's like, that's ridiculous. I don't care what the war has done downriver. That is ridiculous. But then the two large sailors kind of shift on their bare feet. And he's like, it's the price. I do not want to anger anyone, but I as soon as not have business you can be aboard on my vessel, or have any business that you can be on my vessel, like letting a man pay so he can coat you with hot tar, mixing in that business, but you pay the price or you go over the side. The Armland seat herself can dry you off. I'll keep this for the trouble you've given me, thank you. And he pockets the gold crown. And he's like, well, how much for one of the cabins? To ourselves, and you can put whatever is in it now with somebody else. And he's like, I don't want to sleep out in the cold night. You kidding me? If you don't overwhelm a fellow like this, he'll steal your breeches and say he's doing you a favor. And his stomach rumbles loudly. He's like, oh, and we eat what you eat, not with the crew. And plenty of it. And Tom's like, Matt, I'm the one who's supposed to be drunk here. So he turns to the captain, Tom, and flourishes his patch-covered cloak, and he's like, as you may have noticed, Captain, I'm a gleeman. For the price of our passages, I could be more than glad to entertain your passengers and your crew. And the captain is not quite Doman. He's like, my crew is aboard to work, gleeman, not be entertained. Like, oof, oof. Imagine being the crew next to him, like, really, boss? It's like, well, you want a cabin, do you? He's like, and my meals? Well, you can have my cabin and my meals for 5 gold crowns from each of you, and Doran weight, which are the heaviest weighted. And he begins to laugh so hard his words come out as a wheeze. But flanking him, Sainor and Vaza, the 2 sailors, grin wide grins. Like, for 10 crowns you can take my cabin, my meals, and I'll move in with the passengers and eat with the crew. Burn my soul I will, by the stone I swear it, for 10 crowns. And he just laughs so hard that he just chokes off the rest of his words. But he's still laughing and grasping for breath and wiping tears from his eyes when Matt just happens to pull out one of his 2 purses. And his laughter stops altogether by the time Matt counted out 5 crowns in his hands. And the captain blinked in disbelief, and the 2 big crewmen looked poleaxed. He's like, oh, Andorran weight, you say? And it's hard to judge without scales, but he had laid 7 more on the pile. 2 actually were Andorran, and the others probably made up for the weight. And he's like, close enough for this fellow. He already has 1 gold from him anyway. And he's like, He adds 2 Tyrant crowns for whoever could be pushing out the cabin they paid for. And he's like, it's unlikely anybody passenger's going to see a copper of it, but hey, appearing generous helps. He's like, well, unless you mean to share it with him. No, I don't think so, but they ought to have something for having to crowd with everybody else. No need for you to eat with your crew, Captain. You can eat with me and Tom in your cabin. And Tom stares at him as hard as everybody else. Like, Matt's chapters are the best, like, hands down. Like, they're so good. And the captain's like, are you, by any chance, maybe a young lord in disguise? And he's like, I am no lord. But he has reason to laugh, you know. Everyone's kind of just like, oh, we got this strange dude in here with a pocket full of gold and multiple pockets full of gold. But he's like, if you don't mind, Captain, can we see our cabin? I mean, your cabin, I mean. It's late and I want a few hours sleep. And supper. So, the captain leads him way down a ladder and clears his thing from the cabin and sees that Matt and Tom are settled. And Matt learned a lot about the fact that the man would not be pushing anybody out of their quarters. He had too much respect for the coin they paid, if not for them, to allow that. So the captain would take his first cabin, and then it would shimmy the next person down all the way down to the last person, and he would just sleep on the bow with the crew. And Matt didn't think the information could be very useful, but he listens to everything the guy says, trying to know where they're going and who I'm dealing with, all that kind of stuff. The captain was a Tyran named Juan Malia. And he has quite the verbose vocabulary. He's not nobly born, but he would not think anybody he is a fool. A young man with more gold than any young man should have right by might be a thief if everyone did not know thieves never escaped Tarvalon with their haul. Not with their hand. That's Sumeria. That's not the same thing. So, the young man being dressed like a farm boy with the air confidence of a lord that he denied being. He's like, well, by the stone, if you say you are not, I'll say you're not. But he winked and chugged and tugged at the point of his beer, and obviously he thinks it's a grand joke. And there wasn't a secret that Queen Morghese had visited Tar-Valon, though her reason was, but it was obvious to Malia that something was aloof amongst Camelin and Tar-Valon. So Matt and Tom were passengers for Morghese by Matt's accent, and anything he could do to help that enterprise would be his pleasure. Not that he meant to poke what he wanted to, but Matt and Tom are looking at each other. It's like, well, that's nonsense. And Melia's like, of course. And this is literally going back to book 2, when Rand's in Kyrian, and everyone's like, so, what are your plans? Like, I don't have any. Oh, man, you're really good at this game of houses things. You're really keeping us on our toes. And it's like, no, seriously, that's just ridiculous. I don't have any plans. This is basically that all over again, but with a tyrant this time. Which is great. But he's like, okay. But then Malia was talking about being a riverman all of his life, and been dreaming of sailing on the sea. And he pretty much spoke of every country besides Tyr with contempt. Andor was the only one to escape, and he managed to begrudgingly give it, despite obviously not to. He's like, oh, you guys got good horses in Andor, so I hear. Not bad, but not as good as Tyrant stock, which to some extent is true. Tyrant stock is really good usually. It's like, yeah, but it's okay. You guys have decent steel, iron, goods, bronze, copper, and I've traded for them enough. Well, you guys charge a weighty price, but then you have those mines in the Mountains of Mist. Gold mines, too. We have to earn our golden tier. So we learn a little bit about the economy between Andor and Tyr in that regard, and how Andor has a lot of precious metals and stuff like that they can use for industry or for trading, where Tyr doesn't have that luxury. Which honestly, I gotta say, I've always found very interesting, considering that you have the spine of the world right next to Tyr, like part of Tyr. It's like, you have mountains, go mine them. Like, really? Like, that's what you're going with? Like, you guys have mines. You guys have the ability to have mines. Go for it. But Mayen, the country of Mayen, a very small country of Mayen, received his greatest contempt. Even less a country than Mirandy is, one city and a few leagues of land, they underprice the oil for our good Tyran olives, just because their ships know how to find the oil fish shoals. They've no right to be a country at all. And it's like, how dare they know what to do and we don't know what to do, so therefore they can use it to their advantage and stay a country. But obviously, as any true Tyran, they hate Ilion. It's like, one day we'll loot Ilion bare, tear down every town and village, sow their filthy ground with salt. And you can almost notice his beard bristling with outrage at how filthy the Ilion land was. And he's like, even their olives are putrid. One day we'll carry every last Ilioner pig off in change. At least that's what the High Lord Salmon says. Matt wonders what the man thought Tyr would do with all his people if he actually fulfilled the scheme, because the Ilioners would have to be fed, and they wouldn't do any work in chains, and it didn't make much sense to him. But Malia's eyes shone when he spoke of it. It's like, well, politicians do be politicians. But only fools let themselves be ruled by king or queen, by one man or woman. Except Queen Morghese, of course. She's a fine woman, so I've heard. Beautiful, I'm told. All those fools bowing to one fool, the High Lords ruled here together, reaching decisions in concert. That was how things should be. The High Lords knew what was right and good and true, especially the High Lord Salmon. No one could go wrong obeying the High Lords, especially the High Lord Salmon. But beyond kings and queens and even Ilion was a bigger hatred that Mali attempted to keep hidden, but he keeps just talking and talking and talking. And he lets a little bit more slip than he was actually intending to. And he talked about how they travel a lot, or they have to have traveled a lot serving the great queen like Morghese, and they have to see many lands. He dreamed of the sea, but then he couldn't really see land. He couldn't see much but the lands that he already has seen on the outside because he's only heard of other ones. Then he could find the Maynard oil fish shells and could outtrade the sea folk and the filthy Ilianers. But the sea was far from Tarvalon, and they have to understand that they're forced to travel among odd places and people they could not have stomached if it was not serving Queen Morgaze. He's like, I don't really like docking there, never knowing who might be using the power. Since he had obviously heard the High Lord Salmon speak, though. He's like, well, burn my soul, it makes me feel like hullworms are burrowing in my belly, just looking at their white tower, not knowing what they plan. And the High Lord Salmon tells apparently all of Tyr, that the Aes Sedai meant to rule the world. And Salmon said that they meant to crush every nation and put their foot on every throat. Salmon said Tyr could no longer hold the power out of its own lands and believe that was enough. Salmon said Tyr had his rightful day of glory coming, but Tarvalon stood between Tyr and glory. He's like, well, we got no chance of this. Sooner or later they're going to have to be hunted down and killed. Every last Aes Sedai. High Lord Salmon says the others might be saved, the young ones, novices excepted. They're brought to the stone, but the rest must be eradicated. But that's what the High Lord Salmon says. The White Tower must be destroyed. And then Malia just stood in the middle of his cabin with his arms full of clothes, books, royal charts, and everything, and staring at nothing while the White Tower tumbled into ruin, and then he just realized what he said. He's like, well, that's what he says. I mean, I might be going too far myself, but, the High Lord Salmon, he speaks so that he carries a man beyond his own beliefs. If Caemlyn can make covenants with the Tower, well, why, so can Tyr. That's what I say. And Matt's like, oh, as you say, a little mischief. He's like, I think your suggestion is the right one, Captain. But don't stop with a few accepted, though. Ask a dozen Aes Sedai to come, or two. Think of what the Stone of Tyr would be like with 24 Aes Sedai in it. And Malia shudders. He's like, I will send my man from my money chest. And then, stiffly walks out. Matt frowns. He's like, I think I shouldn't have said that. And Tom's like, oh, I don't know what makes you think that. Next, you could try telling the Lord Captain Commander of the White Cloaks he should marry the Amyrlin seat. But then he pulls his eyes down, and his eyebrows are like white caterpillars. And he's like, High Lord Salmon. I never heard of any High Lord Salmon. And now Matt tried his hand at dry humor, and he's like, well, you can't know everything about all kings and queens and nobles there are, Tom. One or two just have escaped your notice. He's like, I know the names of kings and queens, boy, the names of all the High Lords of Tyr, too, and I suppose they could have raised a lord of the land, but I think I would have heard the old High Lords dying. If you had settled for booting some poor fellows out of their cabins instead of taking the cabins, we'd each have a bed to ourselves, narrow and hard as it might be. But now we have to share Malia's, and I hope you don't snore, boy. I can't abide snoring. Matt grinds his teeth, and he's like, if I recall, Tom has a snore like a wood rasp working on an oak knot. He had actually forgotten it, mostly because they haven't seen each other in a long time. But then there's one of the two large men, Saner Arvasa, didn't give his name, came to pull the captain's iron-bound money chest from under the bed. He didn't say a word, just made sketchy bows, frowned at them when he thought they weren't looking, and left. But Matt's beginning to wonder if luck had been with him all night and deserted him at last. He was going to have to put up with Tom's snoring, and to be truthful, it might not have been the best luck in the world to jump onto this particular ship waving a paper signed by the Amyrlin seat sealed with the flame of Tarvalon. On impulse, he pulls out one of his cylindrical leather dice cups, popped off the tight-fitting lid, and upended the dice onto the table. The dice were spotted dice, and 5 single pips stared up at him. The Dark One's eyes, that was called in some games. It was a losing toss in those, a winning in other games. But he thinks to himself, what game am I playing? He scoops the dice up, tosses them again. 5 pips. Another toss, and then again, Dark One's eyes winked at him. And Tom's like, if you use those dice to win all that gold, no wonder you had to leave by the first ship sailing. And he had pulling off his shirt and had that half over his head when he spoke. His knees were knobby and his legs seemed all sinew and stringy muscle. The right a little bit shrunken. He's like, boy, a 12-year-old girl would cut your heart out if she knew you were using dice like that against her. And Matt's like, it isn't the dice, it's the luck. And he's thinking, like, well, is it Aes Sedai luck? Is it Darkland's luck? He doesn't really know. Now, here's the funny thing, is that Matt has these dice. So he rolls 5, he rolls 5, he rolls 5. And every time he rolls 5, he gets the Dark One's eyes. And Tom's like, well, I hope he didn't use those dice. And it's like, well, Tom, you come over and use them. And he rolls them. They're not 5 ones. That'd be a whole scattered a bunch. And then he rolls them again. Not 5 ones. Totally different low. Rolls it again. Whole bunch different. Matt picks it up, rolls it, 5 ones. It's just like, didn't you come do it? Like, that'd be the first thing I would think of. But I'm just like, I suppose. You're going to tell me where all that gold came from then. And he's like, I won it tonight with their dice. And he's like, uh-huh. And I suppose you're not going to explain the paper you're waving around. I saw the seal, boy. Or all that talk about the White Tower business, or why the dockmaster had your description from an Aes Sedai either. And Matt's like, I'm carrying a letter to Morgaze for Elaine, Tom. Nynaeve gave me the paper. I don't know where she got it. Like, well, if you're not going to tell me, I'm going to go sleep. Blow out the lamps, will you? I'm just like, oh my gosh, Tom, really? But even after Matt stripped off down to his small clothes and crawls into the blanket, blowing up the maps, he couldn't really sleep. The Melly had done well by himself with a good feather mattress. Tom's snores were another story, and that pillow muffled nothing. Sounded as if Tom were cutting wood across grain with a rusty saw. But he couldn't stop thinking. It's like, how had Nynaeve and Egwene and Elaine gotten that paper from the Amerlin? They had to be involved with the Amerlin seat in some way, in some plot. One of those White Tower machinations, but now they thought about it, they had to be holding something back from the Amerlin too. And he starts, mimicking Elaine. Carry a letter to my mother, Matt. Carry my mother. Carry the letter. Kill the letter. It's like, fool. The Amerlin would have sent a warder with any letter for the daughter, heir to the queen. Blind fool, wanting to get out of the tower so bad I couldn't see it. And Tom's snore seemed to trumpet agreement. But he thought about luck in the footpaths the most. The first bump of something against the stern barely registered on him, and he paid no attention to a thump and a scuffle from the deck overhead, or the tread of boots. The boat itself made enough noises, and there had to be someone on the deck for the ship to make its way downriver, but stealthy footsteps in the passageway leading to the door merged with thoughts of footpaths, and made his ears pick up a little bit. So he nudges Tom with his ribs, and he's like, wake up! Somebody outside in the hall. And he's already easing himself off the bed, hoping the cabin floor, or the deck floor, whatever it is. That's his actual words. Deck floor, whatever it bloody is. Would not creak under his feet. Tom grunted, smacked his lips, and resumed snoring. But he couldn't really wait to worry about Tom or wake him up or anything. So the footsteps are outside, so he takes up his quarterstaff and he places himself in front of the door and waits. The door swings open slowly, and 2 cloaked men, one behind the other, were faintly outlined by dim moonlight with the hatch at the top of the ladder they had crept down. The moonlight was enough to glint off bare knife blades. Both men gasped, obviously not expecting to find anyone waiting for them. And this is the part I have been waiting for. Matt thrust with the quarterstaff, catching the first man hard right under where his ribs joined together. He heard his father's voice as he struck. It's a killing blow, Matt. Don't ever use it unless it's your life. But those knives made it for his life. There was no room in the cabin for swinging a staff. Even as the man made a choking sound and folded toward the deck, fighting vainly for breath, Matt stepped forward and drove the end of the quarterstaff over him into the second man's throat with a loud crunch. That fellow dropped the knife to clutch at his throat and fell on top of his companion. Both of them scraping their boots across the deck, death rattles already sounding in their throats. Matt stood there, staring down at them. 2 men. No. Burn me 3. I don't think I ever heard another human being before, and now I've killed 3 men in one night. Light. Silence filled the dark passageway, and he heard a thump of boots on the deck overhead. The crewmen all went barefoot. Trying to not think about what he was doing, Matt ripped the cloak off from one of the dead men and settled it around his shoulders, hiding the pale linen of his small clothes. On bare feet, he padded down the passage and climbed the ladder, barely sticking his eyes above the hatch coping. Pale moonlight reflected off the taut sails, but night still covered the deck with shadows. There was no sound except the rush of water along the vessel's sides. Only one man at the tiller, the hood of his cloak pulled up against the chill, seemed to be on deck. The man shifted, and boot leather scuffed on the deck planks. Holding the quarterstaff low and hoping it would not be noticed, Matt climbed up. "He's dead," he muttered in a low, rough whisper. I hope he squealed when you cut his throat." The heavily accented voice was one Matt remembered, calling from the mouth of a twisted street in Tarvalon. "This boy, he causes too much of the trouble. Wait, who are you?" Matt swung the staff with all his strength. The thick wood smashed in the man's head, the hood of his cloak only partly muffling a sound like a melon hitting the floor. The man fell across the tiller, shoving it over, and the vessel lurched, staggering Matt. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a shape rising out of the shadows by the railing, and a gleam of a blade. And he knew he would never get his staff around before it struck home. Something else that shone streaked through the night and merged with the dim shape with a dull thunk. The rising motion became a fall, and a man sprawled almost at Matt's feet. A babble of voices rose below decks as the ship swung again, the tiller shifting with the first man's weight. Tom limped from the hatch in cloak and small clothes, raising the shutter on a bull's-eyes lantern. "You were lucky, boy. One of those below had this lantern. Could have set the ship on fire, lying there." The light showed a knife hilt sticking up from a chest of a man with dead, staring eyes. Matt had never seen him before. He was sure he would have remembered someone with that many scars on his face. Tom kicked a dagger away from the dead man's outflung hand, then bent to retrieve his own knife, wiping the blade on the corpse's cloak. "Very lucky boy, and very lucky indeed." There was a rope tied to the stern rail. Tom stepped over it, shining the light down astern, and Matt joined him. At the other end of the rope was one of the small boats from South Harbor. Its square lantern extinguished, two more men stood among the pulled oars. "The great Lord take me! It's him!" one of them gasped. The other darted forward to work frantically at the knot holding the rope. "You want to kill these two as well?" Tom asked, his voice booming as if it had been performed. "No, Tom," Matt said quietly. "No." The men in the boat must have heard the question and not the answer, for they abandoned the attempt to free their boat and leaped over the side with great splashes. The sound of them thrashing away across the river was loud. "Fools," Tom muttered. "The river narrows somewhat after Tarvalon, but it must still be half a mile more wide here. They'll never make it in the dark." "By the stone!" came a shout from the hatch. "What happens here?" "There are dead men in the passageway." "What's Vasa doing lying on the tiller?" "He'll run us into a mudbank." Naked, save for linen underbreeches, Malia dashed to the tiller, hauling the dead man off roughly as he pulled the long lever to put the course straight again. Yeah. "That isn't Vasa. Burn my soul! Who are all these dead men?" Others were clambering on deck now, barefoot crewmen and frightened passengers wrapped in cloaks and blankets. Shielding his actions with his body, Tom slipped his knife under the rope and severed it on one stroke. The small boat began falling back into darkness. "River brigands, Captain," he said. "Young Matt and I have saved your vessel from river brigands. They might have cut everyone's throat, if not for us. Perhaps you should reconsider your passage fee." "Brigands?" Malia explained. "There are plenty of those down around Kyrian, but I never heard of it this far north." The huddled passengers began to mutter about brigands and having their throats cut. Matt walked stiffly to the hatch. Behind him he heard Malia. He's a cold one. I never heard that Andor employed assassins, but burn my soul, he is a cold one. Matt stumbled down the ladder, stepped over the two bodies in the passage, and slammed the door of the captain's cabin behind him. He made it halfway to the bed before the shaking hit him. Then all he could do was sink down on his knees. Light, what game am I playing in? I have to know the game if I'm going to win. Light, what game? The drama, the action, the fury, the voice acting. It's really fun, I gotta say. In another life, I could have probably have done voice acting. In another life. But now we're going to actually jump a little bit over to a different point of view. Rand, playing Rose of the Morning softly on his flute, peers into his campfire where a rabbit's roasting on a stick. And a night wind makes the flames flicker, but he barely knows the smell of the rabbit. And he's sitting kind of next to a pile of salt, I guess, the next village or town. And Rose of the Morning was one of the tunes he had played at those weddings. It's like, how many days ago was it? Were there really as many, or did I imagine it? Every woman in the village decided to marry at once? What was its name? Am I going mad already? He's got sweat on his face, and he just plays on, just barely loud enough to be heard, staring into the fire. And Moraine had told him he was Taviran. Everybody said he was a Taviran. Maybe he actually was. People like that, change things around them. Maybe Taviran might have caused all the weddings. But that was also close to something he did not want to think about. Well, they say I'm the Dragon Reborn, too. They all say it. The living say it, and the dead. But that doesn't make it true. I had to let them proclaim me. Duty. I had no choice, but that does not make it true. So you can tell Rand's doubting his Taviran nature, let alone his nature of being the Dragon Reborn. But there had been so many faces. Faces he knew. Tam, his mother, Matt, Perrin, all trying to kill him. It hadn't actually been them, obviously, only their faces on Shadowspawn. He thought it had not really been them. But even in his dreams, it seems like the Shadowspawn walked trying to hunt him down. Were they actually only dreams? Some dreams were real, and some were only dreams, nightmares, or hopes. But how was he supposed to tell the difference? Min had walked in his dreams at one night, tried to plant a knife in his back. He was still surprised at how much it pained him. He had been careless, let her come close, let down his guard. And Rand around Min just felt like he didn't need to have his guard on, despite the things she saw when she looked at him. But being with her had been like a balm soothing his wounds. And then she tried to kill me. So the music rose to a discordant screech, but he pulled it back to softness. No, not her. Shadowspawn with her face. Least of them all would Min hurt me. Tuck that away for later. He couldn't understand why he thought that, but he was sure it was true. But he had seen a lot of faces, Celine's faces, coming with this cool and mysterious and lovely mouth. When his mouth went dry just thinking of her, offering him glory as she had long ago. But now, the sword she said he had to take. And with the sword would come Celine, Kalendor. And that was always in his dreams. Every single one of them. And taunting faces, hands pushing Egwene, Nynaeve, and Elaine into cages, snaring them in nets, hurting them. Why should he weep more for Elaine than the other two? But his head starts to hurt and spinning, and sweat rolls down his face, but he plays Rose of the Morning through the night, fearing to sleep, fearing to dream. And that's the end of the chapter. What did you guys think? I love Matt's chapters so much, so you already know how I feel about it. Um, Matt killing 3 people, the first time he's ever killed anybody, all in the same night. Man, it's quite the moment of his life. But yeah, that'd be rough. He doesn't know what's going on, and things are happening to him. He's just not having it. I do wonder what woke Tom up, though, because it obviously wasn't Matt. But good thing for Matt that he did. But Rand's also having his own struggles, and he's trying to pursue the biggest part of his dreams. So it'll be interesting to see what Rand decides to do next, But let me know what you guys think. You can reach out on Facebook, Tales of Red Arm. You can also reach out on Twitter at Tales of Red Arm, or just email me directly, which is talesofredarm@gmail.com. Love to hear your guys' thoughts, whatever little contraptions or theories you guys have of what's going to happen next. It's all good fun. Maybe there's something I missed that you thought I should have added into the chapter. But feel free to just let me know what you guys thought. And I look forward to hearing from you guys next time. So, thanks guys for hanging out, and we'll see you at the next episode, which I believe is chapter 33. So, until then.